When we think about the history of science, we tend to picture this parade of brilliant men, right? One genius after another making these huge breakthroughs. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the history we've been told is missing some of its most important characters? Well, let's dig into that.
Yeah, this quote just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? The story we get from textbooks is that science is a man's world. Men make the discoveries, men drive the innovation, and men get the awards. But as it turns out, behind so many of those stories, there's an unsung woman genius who deserves just as much credit, if not more.
So, to really see what this looks like in the real world, let's jump in the time machine and go back to the 1930s, right to the dawn of the atomic age. This is a story about a discovery that absolutely changed the world, and the woman who was right at the heart of it all. I want you to meet Lise Meitner. She was an Austrian physicist and a true trailblazer. And she wasn't just on the team in Berlin that was about to split the atom, she was the leader of that research group. They were on the verge of unlocking an amount of energy the world had never even imagined. And let's be super clear here. Lise Meitner wasn't just some assistant. She was the one directing the most important experiments. And even after she was forced to flee Germany to escape the Nazis, she kept working from exile. She was the first person, the very first, to figure out what the data meant and to actually calculate the enormous energy that gets released from nuclear fission. So let's just lay this out. On one side, you have Lise Meitner, the one who led the research and had the aha moment, the huge theoretical breakthrough. And on the other, you've got her longtime colleague, Otto Hahn, the chemist who performed the experiments that she designed. So, when the Nobel Prize was handed out for this monumental discovery, guess whose name was on it? Only Hahn's? And just like that, Meitner was basically turned into a footnote in her own story. Hahn, meanwhile, became world famous. So how on earth does something like that happen? Well, this pattern, this thing where a woman's work gets ignored or credited to her male colleagues, it's not a fluke. It actually has a name. This whole phenomenon of systematically erasing women's contributions, it's not new. People have been pointing it out for over a century. So let's put an official name to this injustice. And when I say this goes way back, I mean way back. As early as 1893, the suffragist Matilda Jocelyn Gage was already calling out this idea that women didn't have inventive genius. Then, a full 100 years later, in 1993, a historian of science named Margaret Rossiter finally gave a formal name to the very injustice Gage was talking about. She called it the Matilda effect. So what is the Matilda effect? Well, to put it simply, it's this built-in bias in the system against recognizing the work of women scientists. Their discoveries, their breakthroughs, just have this weird way of getting credited to the men working alongside them. Now, Lise Meitner's story is incredibly powerful, but believe me, she is far from alone. Once you know what to look for, you start to see this pattern everywhere. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's look at a few more. Okay, let's talk about Alice Augusta Ball. At the start of the 20th century, this absolutely brilliant African-American chemist developed the first truly effective treatment for leprosy. This was a total game changer that helped thousands upon thousands of people. But here's where the story gets just infuriating. Alice Ball died tragically young, at only 24, before she could even publish her research. So the president of the university, a guy named Arthur Dean, just took her work, published it as his own, and, get this, had the nerve to name it the Dean method. Her name was almost completely erased from her own discovery. All right, now let's jump forward to 1967. Meet Jocelyn Bell Burnell. As a graduate student, she made one of the biggest discoveries in modern astronomy. She was the first person to find and analyze radio pulsars. Those spinning neutron stars? That was her. So, for discovering a whole new type of celestial object, what did she get? Well, in 1974, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded for the discovery of pulsars, but it went to her male supervisor, Anthony Hewish. The actual person who found them, Jocelyn Bell Burnell, was completely left out. And the list, you guys, it just goes on and on. There's Rosalind Franklin, whose critical X-ray photos were the key to unlocking the structure of DNA. No Nobel for her. Or Esther Letterberg, who made foundational discoveries in genetics that ended up winning her husband a Nobel Prize. The pattern is it's undeniable. And this is the key thing to get here.
These famous examples, Meitner, Ball, Brunel, Franklin, they aren't just a few sad, isolated incidents. They are literally just the tiny visible tip of a massive, massive iceberg of unrecognized work by women throughout science history.
So why does this matter so much? Why are we digging all this up? Well, because this isn't just about correcting old mistakes. Erasing these women from history has real, lasting consequences that affect us right now.
I mean, really think about the ripple effect. When we write women out of the story, we're left with a history that's just plain wrong. We rob young people, especially girls, of seeing role models who look like them. And we end up with this totally flawed idea that scientific genius only comes in one flavor, which is just not how science actually works. But, okay, here's the hopeful part. The story isn't finished. There is a whole new generation of historians who are on a mission to fix this, to rewrite our heroes, and to put these incredible women back where they belong. And it really is like historical detective work. They're digging through dusty archives, reading old letters, and poring over lab notes, piecing together the evidence to find these hidden stories, and finally give credit where it is long, long overdue.
So, how's it done? Well, it pretty much boils down to 3 key steps. First, you have to unearth these forgotten contributions. Second, you have to be willing to challenge the official story we've all been taught. And finally, we have to celebrate these women for the true pioneers they always were.
The goal here is simple, but it's so incredibly profound. It's to make the history of science what it should have been all along, more accurate, more inclusive, and honestly, just more true.
And all of this leaves us with a really exciting question. We've rediscovered the stories of Meitner and Ball and so many others, but the work is not done. So it makes you wonder whose groundbreaking story is still out there, just sitting in an archive, waiting to change the history books all over again.